Hi everyone, I am Princess Garcia and I'll be giving you an overview of literature movements and periods. So we all know that Western literature has many historical periods and stylistic movements from the medieval period through today. So let us discuss or discover the history, styles, and significant authors of Western literature during the medieval period and all other periods. So what is the point of studying literature? So in theory, literature reflects the value of its time. So it serves as a means of social control and it influences the attitude and behavior of people. So that's the reason maybe why it's important. Next, it's a cultural artifact. So we can analyze the people who created it and the people who consumed it. And last, it's a window into a different world because when we study literature on a specific period, so for example, Renaissance period, it might reveal truths that anthropology or historical staff might miss. So what is the significance of studying arts? So if we are studying art that our own time has produced, it can tell us something that we didn't previously realize about ourselves. It might not be something flattering, but it will tell us something. That's why some of our teachers requires us to study art or to study an art that is being produced by a specific period because I know that it will tell us something and that we might be able to feel something when we study art. So literature reflects and refracts the culture that it comes from. With that in mind, studying it or studying literature might be helped by having a basic grasp of different dominant literary periods and times when writers were writing stuff. So what are literary periods? These are spans of times for literature that shares intellectual, linguistic, religious, and artistic influences. And these are simply historical eras during which literary works are created or were created. Literary movements. So there are a lot of literary movements and one of my group members will discuss it to you too.
Now let's move on to the movement. A literary movement could be a general term for items of literature by completely different authors, usually over identical time period which share the same momentum for writing. Typically, these authors seem to be an important unit due to having similar ideas. In other terms, literary movements is explained by writers having common ideas about a number of things such as art, content, philosophy, literature, sociological concerns, etc., etc. A literary movement can be contradictory to a contemporary movement. What is the importance of literary movement? Literary movement is the simplest way to divide literature into classes of comparable philosophical, topical, or aesthetic options as hostile divisions by genre or era. Like different categorizations, literary movement give language for comparison of discussions in literary works. We have here the number one literary movement, which is absurd literature. A movement primarily in the theater that responded to seeming illogicality and purposelessness of human life in works marked by a lack of clear narrative, understandable psychological motives, or emotional catharsis. In other words, absurdism refers to human struggle to find religion in life and inability to find it due to limited constraints. Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot is one of the most celebrated works in the theater of absurd. This play portrays two aimless characters in a world of alienation with no meaning. The absurdity of the situation of the characters arises from their hope for a meaningful life. This possibility of hope that never arrives leads to humor as well as tragedy. Next would be the Aestheticism, a late 19th century movement that believed in art as an end in itself. Aesthetes such as Oscar Wilde and Walter Pater rejected the view that art had to possess a higher moral or political values and believed instead in art for art's sake, emphasizing the visual and sensual qualities of art and design over practical, moral, or narrative considerations. Oscar Wilde was famous for his novels titled as The Picture of Dorian Gray, and on his masterful comedies of manners, Lady Windermere's Fan, and The Importance of Being Earnest. While Walter Pater, on the other hand, was known for being an English critic, essayist and humanist whose advocacy of art for art's sake became a cardinal doctrine of the movement known as Aestheticism. Next would be Comedia del Arte, improvisational comedy first developed in the Renaissance Italy that involves stock characters and centered around a set of scenario. The elements of farce and buffoonery in the Commedia dell'arte, as well as its standard characters and plot intrigues, have had a tremendous influence on Western comedy and can still be seen in contemporary drama and television sitcoms. Number 4 would be Enlightenment, an intellectual movement in France and other parts of Europe that emphasized the importance of reason, progress, and liberty. The Enlightenment, sometimes called the Age of Reason, is primarily associated with nonfiction writing, such as essays and philosophical treatises. Major Enlightenment writers include Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and René Descartes. Number 5 would be the Gothic fiction, a genre of the late 18th century literature that feature brooding, mysterious settings in plots and sets the stage for what we now call horror stories. Horace Walpole's Castle of Otranto set aside a medieval castle was the first major Gothic novel. Later the term Gothic grew to include any work that attempted to create an atmosphere or terror of the unknown, such as Edgar Allan Poe's short stories. Next would be the Harlem Renaissance, a flavoring of African American literature, art, music, and during the 1920s in New York City, Du Bois' The Soil of Black Folk anticipated the movement, which includes Alain's Locke's anthology and the new be The Lost Generation, a term used to describe a generation of writers, many of them soldiers that came to maturity during the World War I. Notable members of this group include F. Scott Fitzgerald and John Dos Passos, and Ernest Hemingway, whose novel The Sun Also Rises embodies the lost generation sense of delusionment. Next would be the Magic Realism, a style of writing popularized by George Louis Borges, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Gunter Grass, and others that combines realism with movements of dream-like fantasy within a single prose narrative. Middle English, the transitional period between Anglo-Saxon and Modern English, the culture upheaval that followed the Norman conquest of England in 1066, saw a flowering of secular literature including ballads, chivalric romances, allegoric poems, and a variety of religious play. Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales is the most celebrated works of this period. The Canterbury Tales is a collection of 24 stories that runs over 17,000 lines written in Middle English period by Joffrey Chaucer. Modernism, a literary and artistic movement that provided a radical breaks with traditional modes of Western art, thought, religion, social conventions, and morality. Major themes of this period includes the attack on notions of hierarchy, experimentation in new forms of narrative, such as stream of consciousness, doubt about existence of knowable, objective reality, attention to alternative viewpoints and modes of thinking, self-referentially as a means of drawing attention to the relationship between artist and audience and form of consent. Next one would be the High Modernism. Generally considered the golden age of modernist literature, this period saw the publication of James Joyce's Ulysses, T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, Virginia Woolf's Mr. Dalloway, and Marcel Proust's In Search of the Lost Time. Next would be Naturalism, a literary movement that used detailed realism that suggests social conditions, heredity, and environment had inescapable force in shaping human character. Leading writers in the movement include Emile Zola, Theodore Dreiser, and Stephen Crane. Next one would be the Neoclassicism, a literary movement inspired by rediscovery of classical works in ancient Greece and Rome that emphasize balance, restraint, and order. Neoclassicism is roughly coincided with the Enlightenment, which espoused reason over passion. Notable neoclassical writers include Edmund Burke, John Dryden, Samuel Johnson, Alexander Pope, and Jonathan Swift. Writers of the neoclassical period tried to imitate the style of the Romans and Greeks. Thus, the combination of term neo, which means new, and classical, as in the day of Roman and Greek classics. This was the new era of enlightenment which emphasized logic and reason. It was preceded by the Renaissance and followed by the Romantic era. In fact, the Neoclassical period ended in 1798 when Wordsworth published the Romantic lyrical ballads. Neoclassical literature is characterized by order, accuracy, and structure. In direct opposition to Renaissance attitudes, where man was seen as basically good, the neoclassical writers portrayed man as inherently flawed. They emphasized restraint, self-control, and common sense. This was the time when conservatism flourished in both politics and literature. We have here Nouveau Roman, or New Novel, a French movement led by Alain Robbe-Grillet that dispensed with traditional elements of novel, such as plot and character, in favor of neutrally recording the experience of sensations and sense. New Novel, French or in French Nouvelle Roman, is called more broadly as anti-novel. And here we have the last one, which is Post-Modernism, a notoriously ambiguous term, especially as it refers to literature. Postmodernism can be seen as a response of elitism of high modernism as well as to the horrors of World War II. Postmodern literature is characterized by disjoint fragment, pistache of high and low culture that reflects in the absence of tradition and structure in a world driven by technology and consumerism. Julius Barnes and Don DeLillo, Toni Morrison, Vladimir Nabokov, Selma Spinchen, Salman Rushdie, and Kurt Vonnegut are among many who are considered postmodern authors. Postmodern literature, precursor modernist or modern literature, emphasized the quest for meaning, suggesting that the author has an enlightenment style of creator and order mourning in the chaotic world. However, after the series of human rights violations that occurred during after World War II, including the Holocaust, the atomic bombings in Japan, the Japanese internment in the US, writers began to feel as if meaning was an impossible quest, and the only way to move forward was to embrace meaninglessness fully. Thus, for postmodernism, literature rejected many of the tenets of modernism, including shunning meaning, intensifying and celebrating fragmentation and disorder, and initiating a major shift in literary tradition.
Today, we will now be discussing about medieval period. Here is an overview of what you'll be encountering in this lesson. For example, is King Arthur, which is a legend during medieval times, and the one who is propagating him, which is Joffrey of Monmouth. Look to the picture on your right. And the one in the middle is an epic called Beowulf, which is about a hero, Beowulf, of the hero of the Celts. What do you know of medieval literature? According to historians, medieval literature is any work composed in Latin or the vernacular between the years of C476 and 1500 CE, which is between the Antiquity period and the Renaissance period. Histories that contains myths, fables, and legends. Medieval literature is like histories that has myths and fables and legends with the mix. They they represent the way of life during the medieval period, but with myths and fantasies in the mix, like fighting dragons or rescuing princes from dungeons, like that. Most of the stories were relayed through word of mouth. Since writing isn't that famous or used during the medieval period, stories are communicated or told through using bards or storytellers. Some surviving medieval literature was written in before the end of the period. What are the characteristics of medieval literature? Well, medieval characteristics is that liturgical literary works was mostly written in Latin as the main cross-cultural language. Why Latin? Well, because during the medieval period, the church or Christianity and the academy uses Latin as a medium for communication. which became the dominant language during this period. For secular literature, French was the dominant language. What is secular literature? Secular literature is literature works without religion. For an example is the Arthurian works about King Arthur. Before King Arthur became a legend or was famous throughout British, he was already famous to the French, kind of like an international celebrity, just like that. Medieval characteristics also often depicts acts of valor, chivalric principles, and other qualities, because during this period, knightlyhood is very famous. Many people dreams or fantasizes about being a knight, the one who saves princesses, goes to dungeons, and fights dragons. This is also a way to spread Christianity in Europe during medieval times. What are some of the famous works and authors? One of the famous works is Caimon's Hymn, which is an earliest surviving English poem, which is about a illiterate and unmusical cowherder, but miraculously empowered to spread the word of God, to sing in the honor of God, the Creator. Well, the theme of the hymn, or the song of praise, is that God created the heavens and the earth. This is used by Christianity to spread their religion. As for Beowulf, it is an earliest Anglo-Saxon epic. This epic is about Beowulf, a hero of the Geats, in which he portrays loyalty and other virtuous acts and qualities that are famous during medieval times. Next is the Canterbury Tales of Joffrey Chaucer. In the Canterbury Tales, a group of pilgrims traveling to Canterbury Cathedral to compete in a storytelling contest. This overarching plot or frame provides a reason for the pilgrims to tell their stories, which reflect the concerns sparked by the social upheavals of late medieval England. This was written to spread the awareness of the upheaval or the unrest caused by war during the medieval period. That is why this is called the Dark Ages. As for the authors, there is Geoffrey of Monmouth, just like I said earlier, is a propagator of the of King Arthur's legends, as he is called the father of Arthurian legends. He is a Welsh author and cleric. As for Christine de Pizan, which is also known as the world's first known feminist, she is a popular medieval author who wrote stories of courtly love and romance for French monarchs, dukes, and other members of the nobility. She was also a women's rights advocate and one of the world's first known feminists. Next is Martin Luther King Jr., which is a founder of Protestantism. You must be wondering, why is he considered one of the famous authors during the medieval period when he is not yet born during that period? Well, it is because his works was influenced by medieval literature, which you helped wrote about his 95 thesis. Next, what are the medieval literature themes? The themes in medieval literature, which is the commonly tackled themes, are courtly love and chivalry, which are depicted several times in Arthurian works. This is because a lot of nobles or nobility, especially the French, loves courtly love and the heroics of King Arthur. That is why a lot of bards and storytellers love to make stories about this. The The themes are keen to highlight important manifestations of medieval culture into their works. By what I mean by culture is that it portrays music, art, architecture, and liturgy. But on a side note, this could be an attempt to quell or quelch the brewing internal strife during the medieval period. They also explored themes on family kinship and many important medieval values, just like loyalty and others. That is all. Thank you for listening, and I hope you all have a nice.
So for this slide, we will talk about classical period. So classical period occurred between 1200 BCE until 455 CE. Basically, this period consists of four distinct periods that would be Homeric or heroic period, classical Greek period, classical Roman period, and lastly, patristic period. So, classical period was a golden age for literature and arts. Classical literature refers to the great masterpiece of Greek, Roman, and other Asian civilization. The works of Homer and Ovid are all example of classical period. The first distinct period during classical era is heroic or Homeric period. Homeric period occurred between 1200 to 800 BCE. In the Homeric period, there were vast changes in Greek language, society, art, architecture, and politics. It is also the period of warrior princesses, wandering sea traders, and fierce pirates. So one famous author during this period is Homer. He wrote the book of Iliad and Odyssey. The next is Classical Greek period. Classical Greek period occurred between 800 to 200 BCE. It is also known as the Golden Age of Greece. It is the period of great philosophers and tragedians. The Persian Wars, perhaps, is the most influential set of events in classical period. The Peloponnesian War also took place in the classical period. It is a war between Athens and Sparta. Great philosophers during this period are Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and authors and playwrights are Aesop and Sophocles.
The classical Roman period. This occurred 200 BCE to 455 CE. This is also the time wherein Rome conquers, Rome conquers Greece. And then later on, it was named as Roman Imperial Period. There are also notable people during this era, like for example, playwriters such as Plautus, and Terence. Roman writers are also noted here, like Ovid, Horace, and Virgil. Roman philosophers include Marcus Aurelius and Lucretius, and also Roman rhetoricians, such as Cicero and Quintilian. Let's move on to their art or music. Their art during this era are actually divided into two periods, art of the Republic and also art of the Roman Empire. They call their art as, they claim their art as an art for every Roman people. It is not only for the rich people, the middle class, and the low class, but actually it's for every Roman people. Their Roman monuments were designed to serve the needs of the patrons rather than to express the artistic temperament of their makers. They do not care what people would say to them, but rather they just wanted to create something for their patrons. serve as the needs of the patrons. Okay. There are also notable arts during the Republic, art of the Republic. Oleus Vitellius, bronzy, denarius with portrait of Julius Caesar. Okay. The art of the Roman Empire are also Roman jug and marble bust of Octavian Fondi, whatever you call it, sorry. Under the influence of the Greek theory, music was thought to reflect the orderliness of the cosmos and was associated particularly with mathematics and knowledge. Let's go to the Eupatristic period. This period happened 180 to the 8th century. Okay, this is also characterized by the divisions within the church on matters of theology and doctrines. In this period, Plato, Aristotle are not involved in this period. The ones that are truly involved here are the members of the church, wherein pastors, priests, just like that. One of them, if I'm wrong, is Saint Augustine. Yeah, it's Saint Augustine, and there are other people involved in this period. That's why it's called patristic period. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you very much for listening.
Please do not forget to take the quiz after this video. The link is posted in the description box below.